Hello, it's Brad Laurie or Blockchain Brad, and today we're speaking about all things Fractal. If you haven't heard about it before, you're going to in detail today. And explaining this further is the CEO in the hot seat right now. His name is Julian Laitloff. Julian, thank you very much for making time to speak with me in what's going to be a very detailed interview.
Thanks for having me.
You're welcome, mate. Now, I know I'm excited in my voice, but we are going to grill here. We're going to explore deeply what Fractal's all about. And in the name of transparency, it's important you know I do not own any of this token. I have not been in the pre-sale, and this is about education in every way. So, Julian, obviously I'm known for doing a lot of free interviews, and I definitely wanted to dig deep. There's so many different elements to this that suggest legitimacy, a lot of backers in this, a lot of advisors that really support this that I respect. But we need to talk about what Fractal stands for. So let's start with you for a moment. Now, Fractal is the company, it is the protocol, but what about Julian? Where do you fit in terms of your background, your experience, and what you bring to bring this to life?
So maybe to start with the company, we've been starting in 2017 when we saw that everyone was rushing towards the on-chain solutions, building protocols, and we saw that the connection, so the actual software that needs to be there to have a great user flow to support some use cases wasn't there. So what we looked at is how could we build critical infrastructure to support people actually using it, so to actually get adoption. And this is how we started Fractal. It used to be, or it still is, an authentication provider. We've always worked, obviously looked at the on-chain layer as well. We had Sovereign as a customer, worked with Uport, but the whole DID space never really took off, and it wasn't really for technical requirements, but for a lack of really a use case that just blew the whole technology out of the water. My background is pretty mixed. So I'm an entrepreneur since 9 years now. Came from a very different space. I used to start my career in banking, realized it wasn't the meritocracy that I was looking for. It wasn't just the markets, but a lot of bullshit as well. Went back to university, did some research there in alternative finance and co-creation, crowdfunding, and then got sucked into being an entrepreneur. And so 3 years later, we are here. And actually, after looking at the space for so long, helping people launch, helping people onboard to the space, and now starting our own protocol.
And Julian, I have to say also, thank you for being transparent about your background and also explaining exactly where you fit in terms of positioning yourself, entrepreneurial experience, business savvy. That's you. And that's typically what a CEO needs to have. And we're going to explore all the different assets you have in your team and advisors and all of those beyond that, because that's going to be really important to make sure you've got the dev team there to back you and vice versa. But let's pull it back a little bit. Now, some of the things that you claim or your team claim that you do functionally is that you are trying to really redress some of the concerns or the issues and problems of the free internet. It says, don't pay for the internet with your personal privacy. And as you mentioned, identity is a big component of this. So what does Fractal fundamentally address in terms of a problem, if we can clarify that in a nutshell? And then let's talk about what you fundamentally are, so it's really clear for the listener.
Yeah. So something that if you want to authenticate yourself, you have as a company one big problem. You have a choice to make. And the choice is you can either trust the data because you've seen it yourself, you store it centrally, you own it basically, or you give it to your users. For example, you store it browser-based, or you have people self-authenticate, and then they own the data and they can keep it and do what they like with it. And in terms of when you want to enable authentication like we did, we had to build this massive database of user data to be able to really make sure that we can claim that the user is who he or she says he is. And that creates a problem in general because, you know, those central databases get hacked. People don't own their data. They can't control where it's going, how it's shared. So far, so bad, right? The first use case that we were thinking about was obviously a regulated market like KYC. And I think that this is slowly coming, but the regulator is very slow to move. And so it's just something that we're going to be starting. So we're going to issue those attestations where we just make it available for others to use. So this is like a very first step. But once we actually grew larger to 140,000 people, now it's 150,000, we realized
fast.
it is. And we realized, first of all, this is a honeypot. And second of all, other projects were talking to us saying like, oh, that's very interesting. Could you like present my product to your audience? And we were wondering, why are they so interested? And the reason basically is because they can trust that our audience is a real audience. And we found out that this basically is a big problem online because there are just very few companies that can really say who you are and what you like. And we all know these two companies that can do it. And they basically own the whole advertisement market.
Well, can we unpack that? Because, sorry to interrupt, but this is just to dig out some of the key points that you make. Now, in the literature, there's a mentioning of the duopoly that exists in the current marketplace or in the current landscape that you're trying to redress. So do you want to talk about that term duopoly and who they are specifically? Because you are essentially trying to tap into that global market and fix some of these problems at that level.
Yeah, we're talking basically about a duopoly that owns 60 to 70% of the ad market, and that's Facebook and Google, right? Like, and the thing is, if you think about it, you're not always surfing on Google and Facebook premises. So the reason is, like, the question is, why do they? What is the ingredients that they have that makes them able to capture this chunk of the market? And the answer is that they know who you are and that they can really cater ads to your needs and to your wants. And it basically, and this has been addressed, and this is something that actually the online advertisement market has well understood, is the rest of the 30%. You know, we're talking about like thousands of companies that need to kind of squeeze into this small pocket that's kind of left. We're talking about a subprime attention crisis. So these folks here, you know, normal publishers, since they do not know, they can't differentiate if you're a bot or if you're a real human, they don't get paid for their work. And we've been seeing the results of this in the last decades, you know, like newsrooms getting smaller. We say the bloggers and builders are not getting paid. So the actual people that are providing the services. So the deal that the free web is based on, which is you can use it for free. How cool is that, right? The initial deal was you just go online. You have to look at ads, for example. In some cases, you don't even need to do that. And everything is freely available. It still is. It actually has gotten bigger, but it has gotten so noisy, and the quality, and we can kind of see that for ourselves, has actually declined. Like the real high quality content is really hard to reach. And this is something that is inherently broken in the system, and that we believe we can change for actually three different reasons. For tech reasons, so there is a new technology coming around. For social reasons, because we all kind of are starting to understand that this is really bad for us. and for regulatory reasons, because also regulators are waking up and saying, 60, 70% market share, just two companies, that doesn't sound right.
And Julian, we need to talk about this so much more. This is going to be a long interview, so if you're not interested in those, switch off now, because let's explore what's really going on in terms of the social dynamics and even the political implications of the companies we talked about, Google and Facebook. They've been on the news for several years with the concerns that many of the people around the world quite sincerely have about not having the control of their own data, not having the autonomy, or even the rights to a lot of the information that is essentially stored and used and even manipulated to some extent by proof. We've seen this, especially some of those leaks that have happened to reveal certain concerns. And now they do have a pretty bad rap in some respects. So are we at the cusp of change in terms of real, genuine push from users? Because it seems like right now it's the perfect time for you to launch, quite sincerely, as someone who doesn't own this token.
But I think there are the problem is that if we're just putting this on the user, there really isn't an alternative right now. I mean, sure, you can go to and use different search sites, or you can use alternative networks. But the problem that we have is that we're really missing an open source zero margin protocol, just like we have with, let's say, SMTP, right? Like imagine the way that we receive and send emails would be proprietary. This would be, you would just see how the whole email space that is just free, is just working just fine for everyone, would kind of go into a state that wouldn't be great for anyone involved except for some companies. And the exact same thing is happening right now in the ad space, because that wasn't something that was inherently built into the web as we know it. It kind of evolved afterwards as an alternative how to get paid, how to monetize. And let's be clear here, we are not against advertisement per se, because that keeps our web free. That is the deal. We are just saying we need something like SMTP for personal data sharing.
Right. Well, let's explore, I guess, a little bit of the nuance of the agenda of the internet, or those that were initially starting the movement for the free internet. So we saw the likes, as you know, about Aaron Schwartz and sort of his work, his coding, and his advocacy to try and build out a genuinely free internet. And we saw the pressures that came forth from the top down to eventually, in a sense, concentrate that down to big business. Corporations got involved, I guess the way enterprise got involved. So my question to you is, how do you acknowledge and address this in the context of a company as opposed to just a protocol? Because we know from looking at how you're built that you're emerging as a very foundational open source protocol that's also trying to build out a company as well. But how do you differentiate between those that have emerged trying to capture the market share of advertising, and even those, most importantly, using the blockchain now, but not reinventing the wheel, but perhaps just strengthening those centralized controls like Libra and DM?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I see different aspects here. So what we believe, first of all, is important to build on the stack that's there, and not necessarily build for the blockchain stack, but build for the actual ad tech stack, right? So we're likely not even going to pitch blockchain until the very end when we are talking to those people, because right now, having seen so many protocols that were pitched in 2016, 2017, they all failed. And they all failed because the technology wasn't ready. So when we come to them and we say blockchain, they are like,
yes,
all right.
Bad taste. Yes, exactly. I can understand. Yeah.
And also, we're not saying like, look, here is our maybe even software, and we're just going to put something above your normal advertisement. That's not going to work. Like, if you want to be part of an ecosystem, if you want to make the ecosystem better, you need to make sure that the people that are generating the content get paid. You can't just put yourself in front of it and say, well, too bad, it's my users, so you don't get paid at all. That isn't going to work. So that's on the one side. The other side is that we need to really create an ecosystem that is open. So the tech needs to be open. So what we're specifically doing is we're providing a way how users can control their basically cookie data. So we are replacing the cookie. But instead of just having the cookie or the data being planted into your browser, what we're doing is we're issuing a claim that is then being attested either by the wallet itself or by the website, ideally. So what we're actually creating is we're creating thousands of different events that are being issued and are not obviously not just issued against like one central wallet, but multiple wallets where the user can then kind of choose who to reveal it to and what to reveal as well. So unlike cookies where like everything is available, the user in this case, and this is going to be automated, so you don't need to click like a button every time.
Okay.
Can choose what to reveal. So there's an interesting thing that comes into play. Actually, now you can start revealing more because you can choose what you're revealing and it's not going to reveal your identity per se. Because first of all, like the whole tracking thing is not that bad. It creates individualized content. So I right away see content that I like. And individualized ads are per se also not so bad. Like if I'm seeing a Ledger advertisement, it's better for me than like, let's say, a baby stroller advertisement because I have no use for it, right? But the deal needs to be like it was in the good old days where you had a blog, you advertised, you got paid.
Yeah.
End of
And
story.
you could change the entire landscape. And I don't mean to FOMO this, but I did this with Kilt. I couldn't help it because credentials are going to be built in universally with the protocol they're building in. And in your instance, do you even understand the magnanimity, the scope, the magnitude of this? I mean, do you really? Because you're at the stage now where there's not really any competitors to what you're doing. If they are, they're all very much at the same level. But we know that this has to be built in for giving us more controls of our own cookie privacy, giving us more decision making, giving us back that power. We haven't had that for decades, not properly. And we haven't even really been cognizant of that as a whole society globally. So is part of the process educating us on what this is so that we know, we've seen all the documentaries that come out. People are educated and they're concerned, but how do you go that one step further where they really care about this enough to make it a movement?
And now they need a solution, and the solution doesn't necessarily need to involve the users per se, but it needs to involve different apps, different players that are out there already that have way more users than we do, that we pitch and that we gain as clients that are using this SMTP-like protocol to just as a standard for data exchange. And this is actually something that was very important to us, that we didn't just start with like having a genius technology, because this is adoption, right? So there's the tech component and there's a huge social component as well that you really need to get right. So one of the first things that I did is I tried to get someone from the ad tech space that I trusted to really tell me if this is good or not. And luckily for us, we got Aura, who was the longtime COO of Just that last week, I think, or 10 days ago, just got sold for $1 billion to AppLovin. So good for him. He is deeply concerned about that. He has been seeing the folks at they have been seeing 90 to 95% of the mobile traffic going through their software, being a tracking software to help advertisers understand if those are bots or not.
Mm.
And to our biggest surprise, he wasn't only saying, this is great, but he like joined us as an advisor immediately and has been actually had a heavy influence on the white paper that we wrote.
That's great. And, I saw your advisors, and we will touch on that because they're clearly in this for the same agenda, that not just the movement itself, but also making sure that we enfranchise the technology that can do this as well. And on top of that, make sure that it happens, hopefully, as you build it out. Now, if in the case that we see the integration of blockchain come forth, you mentioned that's not the main focus. If that flourishes, do you think that will also shed a different light of what blockchain is, especially in the context of previous ICOs, when you pitch this? Because often that's used as the concept is something that's new to many in that arena, or it's something that's had a bad rap. But given what you're saying, you must be talking to a lot of these very significant players in the mainstream, in the enterprise, and even in the government sectors right now, I would imagine, to try and make sure that they understand what you're trying to do, so it legitimizes blockchain, legitimizes the movement, and even brings them into the I guess the fold, to make sure that everything can work properly, legally, in a compliant fashion, to literally collectively change the game so we can redress so many of the broken legacy models.
I think something that you touched on there is super important. There needs to be this very specific advantage, right, that we have, and it needs to be 5 times better, 10 times better, ideally, to a very specific use case. And then if you have the tech and it's actually working, then you can still lose. And we've seen that if you're looking at standards and the history of standards, we had several standards where like the most advanced tech actually lost for several reasons, right? Because there was a conglomerate that said, well, but we want to have this other standard for multiple reasons. And so I think that actually getting a protocol adopted, you need to be strong on so many sides. And this is actually something where I'm very happy, and I don't see this as as just a company endeavor, because the organization is kind of there is no clear line. We have so many people that are somewhere between being an employee but being outside and just pouring so much energy into it. Something that is, to be more precise here, that is important, we believe, is to start really early with this process, to get industry players involved, to tell them what the advantage is. In our case, the advantage is, and this is something that actually gets them excited, that something that has formerly been on opposite poles, no, the beginning of our interview, where I was saying it's data privacy or data verifiability. You couldn't have both, and now you can.
Exactly.
And that changes the game.
And that's where the blockchain comes in. So touching on that, let's talk about some of the discussions you must be having as a CEO with some of these parties in the mainstream, because trust is a commodity. We don't talk about it enough openly using blockchain. We often talk about trustlessness. We talk about circumventing. In 2017, we were doing that. But the reality is that CeFi is here, DeFi is here, CDFi is here, OpenFi is here. So it's all going to work together. It's going to interoperate. It's going to eventually integrate. So are you of that same mind? Are you aware, or do you support the notion that the Web3, for example, and we'll talk about more of that later, is part of the dynamic that's coming, is part of the reality of the future? And in that context, are these big corporations and enterprises making the switch into trust in the future through systems like you for trustlessness design, but most importantly, because we lost trust in those previous entities?
Yeah. I actually had a very interesting debate with one of the guests that was here a couple of weeks ago, namely Bruce from Ocean. And something that he said really resonated, which is that if you're looking at the first web movement, right, you didn't see the corporations really embracing that for a long time. And I mean, if you're looking at the a top 10 list of the biggest companies worldwide, you see actually those startups being there. And I believe that we will see the same thing, that actually the companies, the protocols that are coming up now are going to entirely replace a whole ecosystem. I mean, just to give you an example, Uniswap versus a bank, it's going to take decades until a bank would kind of connect to Uniswap with their core banking system to issue any trades. But so, I mean, a decade? Come on, we have like really central and solid developments in like 3 months, right?
People won't wait. Don't you agree? People won't wait for them.
Exactly. So the question is, because now we're talking, for example, about the advertisement market. I think this is, since it is inherently online, so talking about ad tech startups, I think this is going to move faster. And I mean, eventually also corporates moved into that space, right? So what we really have to find is to give them a really hard advantage over their competitors. And what we are doing at this moment, we are trying to equip those 30 to 40% of the remaining market with weapons. We're kind of arming them in the fight against Google and Facebook if we are successful, right?
When you're
So,
successful, I mean, it really has to be a
right.
win for us all.
Coming back to your question, do I see the breadth of the endeavor that we are starting? Yes, I'm aware of it, and I'm aware that it is risky, and the likelihood is that we're going to fail, but we have to try
Well,
because
let's. I'm going to jump in and I'm going to challenge that idea for you, and it's going to be ironic that I'm doing this. Now, we saw the backlash of Facebook politically. We saw the backlash from the top governmental sectors all the way to the very top. You know, of the president of the United States, even I would imagine at the time. Let's not talk about him though. Let's talk about the agenda though. The message, the force from the top down. They were not happy when they heard that there was this sort of challenge from Facebook to integrate blockchain in the way they were going to do it. And we can see why there was concerns, quite valid ones at the time. So perhaps, you're being a bit hard on yourself, Julian, because if there was such a vehement reaction, such a forceful one to the potentials of what was emerging with the initial constructions of Libra, perhaps you're at the other end of the spectrum here because you're not that. You're actually trying to reinvent the wheel and really showcase something else. So wouldn't you argue that you're perhaps more in favor with the government as they've become more educated about what can happen, in the future of advertising and clean it up?
I think the roles really changed here in our use case. So we have the regulator seeing that this is a problem. I mean, it's the typical Standard Oil case, right? Like we're talking about a 70% market share.
Mm.
This
Yeah.
is like a monopoly, right? In this case, a duopoly. And they are starting to see the effects. But where the backlash is going to come from is that we have a huge market that works with the current structure as it is. And breaking up the structure is going to be incredible hard. And so we will need all the help that we can to really change that, to change from data silos of your personal information that is sitting in someone else's silo to like a data common, where we have a sea of data where every individual can still control this data. And this is the hard part. I think we need to find the ones that are fighting that status quo already, and we need to band together with them.
Mm.
And then we need to tell our believers, our users, let's make those apps great. Let's push these apps. Let's all
Yes.
use them.
And that's a grassroots movement. We've seen that even harping back to Aaron Schwartz, I'm just in awe of what he did in his legacy, in his honor. It was amazing. The true agenda of free internet. Now, why couldn't you get the support from, major governments around the world, especially given that there's a much more benign agenda with you, as opposed to having these centralized controls? You want to open up literally the conversation of free internet and be transparent with the advertising. So why shouldn't they be listening? quite sincerely, not just having the axe and the grassroots movement, because having both is going to really accelerate you far beyond measure, especially when we need it right now.
I mean, first of all, we are very early and we are initiating those conversations. I mean, the regulator can only set the frame, but the players in the field, and they need to be the one that band together. And we've actually seen that working before, right? Kind of off the blockchain use case, but still, like if we're taking a look at Amazon, that was is now quite severely challenged by Shopify, that actually kind of armed the rebels and is now enabling everyone to have just like that, a shop that works as well as Amazon's. How cool is that, right? So the thing is, it does work, yeah. And right now, this is more a game of getting the right people into a room, and they all see the problem. That's not the issue. They all say, look, if this continues, and the thing is, it does continue because all the growth in this market goes to like 90% to Facebook and Google. So we're actually the 30% are even shrinking further, and they see that. And now the cookie is being switched off, so they're even further blind. The central tracking on your mobile phone is not going to be available. So they say, how are we going to do it in the future? And that will have a direct impact on their bottom line. And that is the point when people tend to act.
Yes, and as you appreciate, there's a lot of information being put out right now, going global, even documentaries like The Social Dilemma. I watched that with my oldest daughter, who's 16, and what was impactful for her was that she just didn't understand how algorithms worked, but more importantly, the employees' children were precluded from all of that, they weren't exposed to all of that stuff because those employees who were creating these problematic algorithms didn't allow their children to engage in their social media world. And that was the greatest, most powerful message to young people, to millennials, is that if the people who were creating these problems, potentially, or this architecture, were not endorsing with their own families, it really spoke volumes to people watching that. So once again, the millennials around the world, the children of the world that are coming forward to engage in workforces, engage in just the broader society that we're now involved with globally, they definitely are becoming more cognizant and aware and more active and becoming activists for change. So I do think you have something much greater than perhaps you even know. But let's go back, without trying to be too idealistic, to the advertising aspect. Now, you say that you're the future of digital advertising. So I wanted to explore this a little bit more, to understand exactly how, with the different features you've built in, that you're going to change the advertising game in a way that is much more progressive and is much more open.
So the mixture to how you get paid as a blogger and builder is that you have attention and you know who that is. So, for example, you have people watching your show, and if you know who they are, and you could tell people, look, I'm going to just have a 20-second thing in the beginning and at the end, and these are the people you can reach. They'd be like, oh, that's very interesting because this is exactly the target audience I want to reach. So you will get a better price, and you get paid. The problem is that pretty much no one knows actually who the audience consists of, and that makes it really hard to put a price tag on the audience, even though you're pretty sure that they are really good, but you can't prove it. And then you also have like all the hordes of bots that are just surfing, clicking the web for different reasons. So what are we specifically doing? We are offering a base technology in which apps can create wallets for their users where they can store this ad relevant information in. So once they surf on a site, this information is stored, and ideally it's being attested by the site itself. Just because it detects, well, the technology, Fractal technology is being used, this person has really been there, and you just issue it. So then it's public. Doesn't mean that everyone knows and can tie that to a person, but then it's public. And if you choose to reveal this, then the page that you've been surfing on that attested it is part of the data that is being shared. So you don't only want to purchase this data as a publisher, because then your attention is going to be worth a lot more, but you can also make money from it by making it widely available. So you're creating the data commons in the first place. So suddenly, when someone is on your site, you can purchase this data, you can enrich your information to make sure that you're showing the right ad, and you finally get paid. And that's the most important thing.
And fairness is built into this as well, throughout the process, making sure things are cleaned up so that it helps the content creators essentially get more out of it. But also, it's in fairness for those who are listening, it's also conditioned and reciprocally beneficial, because the system for advertising is also conducive of what they're looking for, as opposed to submitting things that are really designed on algos that are separate from both parties.
Well, in this case, just to give a very specific use case, you could just say, look, please make sure that those are real humans, because, you sometimes have sites that have 90% bot traffic, and advertisers have just come to kind of live with that. So in the last couple of years, prices have really dropped, because it is just a mixed pricing where people say, well, it's 50% bots, but the other 50% are good. So I'm just going to slash the price in half, and then it should be fine. And I mean, you've got like the weirdest use cases out there. There was a big documentary, big article on Uber switching off 150 million in ads and seeing no difference in their user growth. Wow. Zero difference. They just switched it off. We should definitely link this article in the show notes, because it's just hilarious. They switched it off. Nothing happened. Wow. Imagine putting out 150 million each month and trying to kind of make sense of it. Nothing happens.
So do you find that's an issue, just the fact that so many things are not transparent? And even in that sense, not to be too political, but imagine the implications of cleaning this up through something like you, because we've seen what happened at elections all the way to the very top, how things can be manipulated to literally change the outcomes of potentially voting systems to thwart the outcomes for government. So this can only be better, I think, in the sense of having more, giving us more and affording us more control and more transparency.
I mean, what we are, we're not going to change the way that social media works. But what we can do is we can make sure that there is less attention-prone things going on. I mean, you've seen news outlets coming up that served like brighter, faster, also maybe lighter content, and that thing has just kind of excelled, and the content has become like super light in the social networks. And I mean, one of the reasons is that if you design a system that is just going for optimizing attention to a point where you have a divergence between the actual usage that you have as a user and what the app is trying to do, that's not great. And we do need to come back. Well, there are different problems that we have as well, like with fake news or with public trust in elections that, like, well, sure, that has worked for the last decades, but maybe also people's attention has changed, that they want to see more nowadays, right? I think we do have the technological solutions for it. But I think especially for something that is so critical, I think the technology also has to mature quite a bit.
I totally agree. And the thing is, the technology is really giving the choice by design. And that's what I think is the most important part, is it highlights the point of, I guess, as you said before, quite eloquently, is that you can embed the privacy controls. You can embed that cookie control in, which is really going to change the forefront of everything. And when we've seen some of these problematic issues come forth in the manipulations of social media of the past.
Right.
So whilst you can't change it, you can change some of the issues that underpin it.
I think, I mean, you want to look at the money flows when you want to understand the system. And if you have the lifeline of the free web being the marketing dollars, and you suddenly start like taking it away, going to two companies that actually become really rich by doing so, then you also will see a result on the receiving end that suddenly gets less and less. And we've seen the results firsthand.
Yes.
Now, coming back to the user, I think something that I might not have touched base on that much is there are actually a couple of reasons why you as a user should do it. First of all, I mean, it's kind of neat to actually see who tracks you and what's being kind of recorded about you. So you are in control, right? You can just see what's there. And you can also have a say in who do I want to share it with? You know, like for example, I have zero problems sharing pretty much everything with magazines that I read or publishers that I trust because I'm also getting the content. Do I want to share everything with, some sketchy sites I'm on? Probably not. And I can control this. I can control this here myself. And I'm also getting a share of the of what the publishers are paying for my data. That might not be that much, but for some people, it's a nice side effect as well.
Absolutely. And we know data is the buzzword, or data, depending on where we're situated in the world, because data is value, data is monetizable, data matters. Data also should be partly owned by us if we're the creators of that data. And then the transparency feature. So with data commons, the fair market, the data union, they're all three things that can be learned more by going through your literature and your website. But would you argue that really the game changer for you is making sure that there is just quite simply that acknowledgement that was the problem, and then working through and giving us more of that autonomy to make sure that we can have those cookie controls? I mean, arguably that's going to be beautifully situated and synergized with things like credentials, things like copyrights, things like all these things that are coming now. That seems to be the carrot that you're really bringing forth.
I believe that what we need is, I mean, and that's the tough part, right? You don't only need an impeccable technology that is just really working. And I mean, this is really tough. And I'm very happy to have such a great technical co-founder, Julio, who has been working in that space for quite a while, who's built up a great team. But you also need this use case. And that's the thing. You need a killer use case. You can't just have like be there and say, this is my protocol. Now let's see who's going to use it. That's just not going to work. You need to have this killer use case. And if you need to drive it yourself, then you need to do it. But the ideal scenario is that you find this partner and who's going to help you scale. And that is the symbiotic relationship that you have there. And this is actually something that we're quite hard at work to accomplish. And yeah, let's see when we have someone like that that we can announce.
Absolutely. And, I read through, and we discussed this in the beginning, that you do have that user base. There's approximately about 15,000 at the moment, and that's growing with some of the users of this system, of this protocol, and moving forward with the company as well. But the team itself,
150,000 though.
Oh, my apologies. It is, yes. The reason I say
the thing is, it sounds like a lot, and it is for that use case, but for the ad tech use case, that's not much. We're talking about you need to have like 10 million, 50 million, 150 million to really make a dent.
And Julian, we want that for you, sincerely. Again, I don't own this token, so I mean this quite objectively. Of course, we want that for any of you who are trying to build this out. And I think you can achieve it with the right team and with the right approach. I mean, the reason I mentioned 15,000, my apologies, because I'm also going to be an advisor for a team that have users. So that user base is really important. You have 150 approximately now, 50,000. That's a big deal because, as you know, the IDO landscape, or the Launchpad landscape right now, is still replete with lots of problematic startups that aren't necessarily anything. They don't have users, so many of them. They don't have anything but an idea. You have so much more than that already. So do you understand that you're already differentiated between so much of the launched landscape and the narrative beyond the ICO world in crypto speak? I mean, you literally are in the top standard, or the top group of potentially legitimate startups. I say that because it's your position to say that, not me. That can really change the game for the future.
I think what we've been seeing is that protocols were launched and then they were there. And then suddenly companies started realizing, well, we need to build this whole stack. So we need to build the software for it, so people could interact with it. Then we need to build the user base. We need to build the use cases. And this is actually something that we've been front loading for the last 3 years, where we can comfortably say, yeah, we're going to give 150,000 people the Fractal credentials in their hands, so they can try and test it. And
well,
we
let's
have
talk
the
about
software
that.
ready.
Let's talk about that. That's a huge thing. So team, I wanted to understand more about the scope of the team, the credentials of the team, the partners as well with other teams that you know. There's so much going on there. I read through and had a little basic look. And then also, beyond that is building this out for the future so that it can be done. I mean, do you want to give them a plug just in a very broad sense, so that we can better understand that how you built this? And most importantly, Julian, how have you done this without having that token? Often that's sort of misappropriated for some teams when they use it to generate funds, as you've alluded to. You haven't done that. So how have you managed to build this whole team without the token?
Well, good old software and good old revenue. So what we did is we built a single sign-on solution. So also on that level, this is how we got started. Also on that level, the idea to have reusability, to have a frictionless experience, both from the company side, but also from the user side. I'm very happy to have a co-founder who has been both exploring this space, but was also able to really deliver something that actually works for 150,000 people. Because as you can imagine, having this in a central way is really a honeypot for hackers and all types of people that want to get to that data. So you really want to be careful. And we've built that up, with clients like Ocean, with Sovereign, with Polymath, and
with Kilt.
With Kilt. And this is something that has helped us in the last 3 years. We also have different partners. So given our regulatory background, we have a federal fund that from the German Ministry of Finance, I believe, that invested in us. So like the typical VC funding game to really get to the point where we are. And obviously partners like 2 years ago, we got Fabian Vogelsteller as an advisor. He helped us a lot. He had the, not only the ERC20 standard, but also the ERC 725 standard, one of the early DID proposals. So, and this super helped us, right? I remember him putting us in touch with the Polymath people that were back then already building their own DID thing that we just announced last week after working on it for so long, that we're going to be their main provider. We actually helped set up the whole DID ecosystem there. We are quite excited about what they're going to do with it. And also the use case. I mean, anyway.
Lots coming, but you're not telling me. I can tell you're pulling back a bit there. And that's also, it's interesting because one of the challenges we have also is all the speculative aspects of this. I used to be really trying to pull back from trying to create FOMO and hype. Now I don't care. Because the way I look at it is that at the end of the day, if that's going to happen, it's going to happen organically anyway. Honestly, Julian, what matters is if they're going to do it, let them do it with something good. That's how I see 2021 in the future. So I'm much more relaxed about that aspect. I know you can't be. So let's pull it back though to your team. You mentioned some really important people, especially in the Ethereum camp, who have been significant in trying to be advocates for innovation. So you really are well situated with your team. Please go on. Let us know more about this so we can really trust that you've built this for several years.
Yeah, the real game changer obviously is Polkadot, right? Because when we're looking at Ethereum, it's amazing and we love it. But the problem is that the DID issuance is just too expensive for some normal things, like even for KYC. I mean, just imagine you have to pay like 20 bucks to get like your KYC credentials up and running. That is quite expensive. Polkadot allows us to really issue credentials and have them on chain for a tiny fraction of that price. And that suddenly allows use cases that were not there before, because you have those high transaction value use cases that Ethereum could do. And I mean, look at Uniswap. That's amazing. It's one of the first fully functional real protocols that we see. So I love it. But now, with Polkadot coming up, there is going to be so many use cases that suddenly work. And I think that the ad use cases is one of them. Replacing the cookie.
Well, let's talk about this a little bit more, because what you're saying is absolutely huge in the crypto landscape, because tribalism is rife. And as you'd appreciate, once certain parties get involved with a certain camp or a certain protocol or a platform, they find it very difficult to rationalize an agnostic agenda because money is involved. But what's great about hearing from you, rather than me, and everyone knows I'm agnostic in every way, is that you're willing to move and iterate according to the needs of Fractal, not about being beholden to a specific platform. So in this instance, you mentioned Polkadot, and and many other people in the world know that right now I'm very bullish on the technology, but that's because it's at the pinnacle, it's at the top of what can be offered right now. So do you feel the same? Do you feel that it's really paramount to make sure we continue to acknowledge the iterations, the development, the innovation, and even beyond Polkadot in the future, there'll be others that come forth. But right now we have the co-founder of Ethereum literally building parity in Polkadot for the very reason you're saying, to make this more interactive and used.
I completely agree. And I mean, the thing is, we are launching an ERC20 token, right? So we want to be part also of the Ethereum ecosystem, because there are things that you can only do there. But I mean, the great thing about Polkadot is that it allows you to bridge the different technologies, and this is something that we're going to make complete use of.
I'm sure. So can I suggest things like, are you going to be partnering with Moonbeam, for example, or Edgeware, or some of these key technologies that are bent on bridging? Akala, we know they are top tech right now with their EVM work in bridging. So surely you're in that well, because if they're there and you're partnering with them, you're with a lot more.
I think it's a bit too early to talk about it. We want to see things built, just the foundation of it first. But this is obviously something that is very interesting. I mean, if we're looking at, for example, a coexistence of different of a token on the Ethereum side as well as on the Polkadot side, having one side locked up, so that there are not more tokens than there should be. But this really allows you to really leverage both sides, for example. So that is an interesting angle. We still need to see, though, that there's a lot playing out at this moment, right? Like the first slot auctions are coming up.
With the parachains,
we need to have very fundamental pieces of the technology yet to be launched and to be fully working. And I mean, this is actually why I got into being an entrepreneur in the first place. And this is like a dream come true, because we are seeing the history of the web in the making right now. Like, this is the forefront, and this
100%.
is
Web3 right now.
Very deep development that is going on, and it's has been going on for years, and it's coming live right as we speak.
It's super exciting, and that's why parity is just so important. It's why Berlin, in my opinion, is very important. So from your experience, how has it been liaising the parity? You mentioned also so many different names, and obviously I know a lot of them by having talked to them, but in terms of stealth mode, not many people have been talking about Fractal for some time, even those who look at the GitHub, even those who experiment and tinker with some of the discussions in the dev circles and discords. They weren't all talking necessarily about Fractal. So how did you manage to do that? How did you stay in stealth for a while? How did you navigate those people trying to start to FOMO and promo as well? I mean, it's been a while since I've known about you, but I haven't interviewed you until now.
The guy you go to fix something, who knows about some stuff and is just working in the underbelly of things. This was basically us. So the people that needed to have authentication for various use cases came to us, and we weren't sexy at all. We were not building like the next big protocol for the last 3 years, and the DID space was just tough. I mean, some companies didn't even make it, unfortunately, even though they had so much funding. And it wasn't because the technology wasn't great. It was just that the use case wasn't ripe for it. So we've kind of dedicated ourselves to just building for the last 3.5 years, which is why we got to know a lot of people that then saw us working and started trusting us. So once we said, well, I think we have something big here, and now we really want to go for the protocol, people knew us already. So that made it so much easier.
Yes, and knowing the crypto landscape like I do, I mean, I love researching networks. You have a very strong one. That's reality. So for those who are more positioned in the speculative frame, this is important information they need to know. So because you're agnostic, and because some of these key advisors you have are very important for more than one platform and ecosystem, that is going to literally bridge already into many different platforms, not even just the likes of Ethereum's ecosystem platform, and Polkadot's, but also others. We're going to see other layer ones that are really going to pay attention to what's happening and be supported by the framework and the architecture and the reputation that you've built, because that's very valuable in crypto, as you know. So that's exciting. And then you also have the stakeholders, right across and that's explained through your information, from users to advertisers to the insurers to the verifiers and the attesters as well. They're all built in across those landscapes, not just in those two platforms. So the scope of this is really quite immense, because you're starting from the best possible position of reputation.
What we were trying to do, since you mentioned all the different stakeholders, what we are trying to do is something we learned in the last 3 years is try to make it simple. Try to find your killer use case, make it simple, only focus on that, and try to build an MVP that actually works in the market. So what we're going to do is we're going to focus on the data provisioning incentivization layer, and we are going to really build this out together with partners. So this is not going to be just our brainchild that we build and build and build for years. Then it's live, no one wants to use it, but that we're going to start building together with industry partners from the get-go. So
okay.
I think the ad market is not going to be there in the beginning. And I think that first, the whole data provisioning needs to be working for us to switch the rest on as well.
I totally agree, getting that infrastructure right. So Julian, you're the CEO. Imagine that I'm someone that you're pitching to me to support the utility, because we're going to talk about that token later. But we know that there's a speculative aspect to this. But if we remove that from the equation for a moment, we have those educated supporters of the utility. How would you pitch this to say, these are the partners that we're now coming forth with? This is the real deal approach in our infrastructural step. And then beyond that, you're going to have, new steps as you move forward in your roadmap. But as someone that is going to be engaging this well, me included, I will be supporting this utility token, I'm sure, at some point, because I'm very, very much passionate about trying to make sure we do have real utility functionality. So how do you evidence this with where you're at now in the roadmap? I really want to get, clear and real with you about this, so that people can understand that it's not just lip service, it's not just partners for partners' sake. We're so tired of that narrative. How do we move beyond that to really capture more than imagination?
Well, if we're looking at real utility, you need to look at what market you're in, right? And first to understand what's at stake, what's the market that you want to capture. We're talking about the ad market that has propelled 2 of the top 5 companies in the US. Their revenue is basically purely coming from ad revenues. And what are we going to do there? Well, we're going to
Well, tell me what you are doing. That's what I want to know.
Right. So we're talking about the utility of being able to purchase this data as a micro transaction. So it's not just that there's someone sitting there thinking, "Shall I buy this data?" It's a fully automated process where they purchase this data from the user and from the data providers to make sure that they can prove it to advertisers and thus up their price. Mm-hmm. So if you want to have a token that is later going to be used, 1,000,000 times per minute, because people are just surfing on sites and this is automatically being bought, then this is where the utility is going to come from. Plus, you could also need to could potentially make sure, this is what we explained in the white paper, that you can really trust the data as well. So what you want to do is you want to stake on the correct data, kind of similar to what Uniswap is doing. You're putting money into a pool, and thus making sure that people can really trade there. What we are planning to do is you put money into a data pool where you say, well, I trust these, and if people are buying from that pool based on the information that you're providing, which is you can trust it, because if you can't, I'm losing my money. Then you can really make sure that there's a healthy ecosystem going on. What we will need for that is a partner who really has usage already. And I mean, there's something, if you're looking at Falcon, right? Or if you're even looking at Ocean. I mean, Falcon took 3 years, 2 years to develop the protocol, go live. Ocean was a lot quicker. I think it was 1.5 years. It's not your typical startup where you just go and it's on. But still, we have set the thing for ourselves to get a partner that can get this technology in front of not 100,000, but millions of people. This is what we're looking at.
And this is what I want to talk about, because in 221, right now, as we literally speak, you are poised for that. You did wait for the right and optimal time. Hopefully not just because of the bull market that's happened now. That's what I wanted to check with you as well, that you're not just moving because of the potential for price appreciation, that's going to benefit the company long term. We see a lot of that sort of stuff happen. But because you have that proof, that empirical evidence of real users, that's where I really want to touch on further, because having Bruce, having the Ocean team means a great deal, because they have proven themselves already. And I don't own any Ocean currently. That's important people know, but I know Bruce and I know the team and how legitimate they are. So how do you break the boundaries though beyond the blockchain in the crypto speak? How do you then get those parties that are going to build out into those millions of users? That's the thing I'm trying to understand more, because you should be, and probably are, and probably not telling me, you're having these conversations with some of those parties because you're ready. So come on, let's not play around here.
I mean, just hypothetically, one use case that would be quite obvious is that if you want to, and this is a new concept, stake your data, where you say, I want to make this data available to different use cases. It could be, for example, for research, that you say, well, if they want to research, use it for research, I'm completely fine. Or if you want to give it away if people pay, well, your go-to place is the Ocean data market. So wouldn't it be nice to have an integration where you just feed your data into a pool, so it's anonymized, but you can still sell it, and based on your share of how much data you shared, you get paid for it. I think that's a pretty obvious use case right there. We have quite some apps that have quite massive usage. And wouldn't it be great if they would come with the data wallet already, where you can see not only your crypto, but what's actually being stored. So they block everything else, but just store the credentials locally. So those are the use cases we're looking at. And it's not sandbagging when I'm not talking about that more than that, because we need to see, we need to get some things moving first, and we are still in the phase where we need to wrap up the core of the protocol to be able to go live, ideally even as early as late summer. Let's see if we get that, but that would be like a sprint compared to other protocols.
Well, let's talk in terms of months, because obviously summer differentiates depending on where you are in the world.
Well, we have a couple of things coming up. We can talk about like a couple of days. We have the community sale going on, where actually the community can become part of Fractal already, actually getting slightly better conditions than the private sale round. I mean, it is capped and it's not a huge chunk, but that was really important for us to be able to give that opportunity to the community, because we will need the community to actually use our customers' apps to make this successful. Then we're talking about like a first use case in the next couple of months to really showcase what we're going to do. This is not going to be likely not going to be linked to on-chain just yet. Excuse me, but it will involve the token already. And late summer or early fall is our rough timeline when we actually want to go live with the mainnet. As you know, you can't rush some fundamental development things, and we are very aware of this. So there is a risk right there if we can develop it by then, but we're actually, and this is what you're seeing with our strategy as well. We really want to go to the market, both with the token as well with the network sooner than later, to get feedback. And that's the most important part. If you want to make sure that you get adoption, feedback is crucial.
Well,
and this is what we're going
Julian, I'm going to ask you a tough one here. The influencers won't ask you this, but was it also because of the pressure from the top down of your backers? Because if I was a backer in early rounds, I would have asked you and put pressure on you to launch in this market.
No, we've been planning in early October that we want to go live by that time. We actually faced the opposite type of pressure, where people said, "This is crazy. Why are you doing it in such a short time frame?" Because we, as you can see, we also didn't have huge rounds in our private sale at all. We could have like ballooned this, like projects used to do before, like
Definity
20 million,
and
50 million,
100 million.
And then once at a point when it comes to market, you had like your couple of X's already and a couple of them. And this is not what's happening here, because we are actually going to the market very consciously, because we want people to be able to just go on a DEX and engage with it, because this is the purest and truest form, we believe, of how you can do a launch. You basically don't do a launch. The only reason we are doing this launch is that we want to be able to distribute it to as many people as we can.
Well, we're going to find out, because we're going to see how this goes, and we'll talk about the Launchpad. I really want to get into that. But the token itself, I wanted to ask about. This is definitely a challenging question more generally, not about your token. But often we see the challenge inherent with the lack of correlation between token and value, token and proof, token and tech. A lot of problems with some of the designs that we see out there, and they do differ. So are you confident in terms of regulation? Germany is very progressive. They very much support blockchain. But I know this is a tough question, because a lot of CEOs don't want to go there. But how do you grapple with the challenge of a utility token, or any kind of token governance, especially that doesn't tend to show that clear correlation. Are you confident you can?
I think it's okay that it doesn't show the correlation at first. I mean, if you're looking at the professionals or so-called professionals that are venture capitalists, right? Like you are talking about insane valuations. I mean, or insane investments. Has the team proven itself in terms of like if you're looking at WeWork when they got their huge investment? No, they didn't. But and this is why speculation can help really fund game-changing technology, and this is very important that this happens. And I know that one thing is true is that regulators definitely have seen that we need more open source technology around, which actually and this is with to say with a caveat, but you have actually seen a more crypto friendly regulation in Europe throughout. And this includes Germany, this includes Switzerland, Estonia.
Estonia, yeah, I was going to say that. Spain, I think, even in some respects. UK's
Right.
been challenging, though. You know, they have sort of a bit of pushback from that side of the continent.
And I think that there is an interesting dynamic that is playing out because the just the legal framework of how the US works versus how Europe works in terms of regulation is very different. And
Right.
that was a very big disadvantage when the first web wave came up. But now it actually proves as an advantage because in Europe, kind of the stance is that you kind of look at it first and then you regulate, so you don't go in so proactively, or you regulate if you see actually something that is going on that isn't working.
And that's exciting because Australia does the same thing. We're a little bit more, I guess, ambitious, a little bit like the US in the way that things played out first. But certainly when it comes to regulation, the US is playing hardball, really hardball. So where do you position yourself with the US in this context? Are you going to be, have you been open, and will you be open with the token even with when this unfolds to US participants, US utility supporters?
Unfortunately, not. So this is something that we have to see what the current regulation is and where we are going to abide with that. Obviously, we have the tools to do so ourselves. We built that up over the last 3 years, so that's not going to be a problem. But just regular purchasers of the token are not going to be allowed. And I mean, you could compare that to Kickstarter and ask, like, why can I fund a cool project where I'm going to buy a product later that I really like? And you could say the same thing about open source crypto projects that I really want to see working, where I want to use the product in the future. But the US comes to a different conclusion on those two use cases. And this is just something that we have to work with.
Yes, and you can imagine that those parties that are really advocating for change in the blockchain sphere and even in the crypto space, that they would be really pushing for change and we've seen this now actually with a lot of the state initiatives, state-led endeavors to truly change the game and bring this forth to those powers that can change policy, that can change literally, I guess, preclusions or barriers to entry for blockchain initiatives or startups. But I want to go back to the token for a moment, because one of the things that's interesting is we now see Launchpads literally launching everywhere. We see, a lot of different FOMO because of the price movement that does happen, engineering, small raises, all kinds of stuff. So I want to go and talk about the token distribution as well, because I noticed that, from what I understand, you'd raised in a pre-sale about 2.2. Is that correct? Roughly. Okay. So that's not a huge amount, which you've explained. But one of the things that I noticed is that quite a lot of the percentage is going to certain parties. So to be more specific, we're talking about a lot going to those who are founders, for example. I mean, I haven't got all the rundown of every percentage, but there was a lot that was allocated for different groups. So do you want to just touch on the reasoning behind the different components and different parts of the distribution pie?
Yeah, sure thing. So if you're looking at the major chunk, it's actually going to people that are using the protocol in the future. So the mining incentive is by far um, nearly 50% going to be distributed over the next 50 years. So this is something that was important to us, that we don't have everything pre-mined, but actually offer a healthy reward down the line, which is going to decrease the inflation for the people in the very first couple of years, right? What you're actually also seeing, and I mean, this is transparent, it's 5% that we founders hold. You can compare that with other projects. We actually wanted to be at a point where it's like just the norm.
But do you think it
We
is?
are,
Do you think 5% of the entire supply is the norm? Just so that we can learn more. Do you think that is normal?
well, you tell me,
Well,
because
I'm asking you because
I
I don't know.
it's the first it's the first token I designed, and I'm not looking at other projects on a
Julian, thank
daily
you for saying
basis.
that because one of my questions was, did you design it? Because often advisors get in, you know the game. There's so many questionable moves that happen on the blockchain that we have to have these grills and these conversations because sometimes advisors come in, and I imagine this happened to you, where for a fee, they will tweak your tokenomics and they'll do tasty, tokenomics to really get people in. So it's good
Yeah,
to hear that you did the work, you built the tokenomic design.
yeah, I did build the tokenomic design.
Okay.
Obviously, I had advice mostly from people that actually launched their own protocol, because they walk the walk, and they put their money where their mouth is, and they had experience with their decisions, and they could openly tell me, well, some of these decisions I wouldn't repeat, and something has worked out. So I try to kind of get that experience in. And obviously, you have a lot
Very
of
wise.
um, other advisors that don't have this experience. And, I would take this with a grain of salt, but it's also valuable to have. But to come back
Well,
to your question,
yes, please do.
what was more important to us is that not the amount, and we've seen everything, right? From 40%
Seen crazy
going to the
stuff.
founders to like 3%. What was important to us to really lock it up. So our founders tokens are are vested over 50 months.
Yeah, I saw that.
Um, so this is not a wave,
This
right?
is
Like after
trust.
50 months.
Yeah, let's just be
The,
real about this, Julian. I love this conversation. So, lockup is trust, lockup is longitudinal, lockup is proving that you are there for the long term to build this out.
yeah.
So, thank you so much for doing that because we don't see that all the time. And we need this more than ever in 2021, that proof. So, how long have you locked them up? It's the team and the advisors, isn't it?
So for the founders and the company tokens, that we also need to refinance the running the company and making sure that the protocol gets developed. We have a 6 month lockup and 50-month vesting. So this is nearly over 4 years. So we are planning on being there through the crypto winter that at one point is certainly going to come, and then it's also certainly going to go to new highs.
Yes.
We don't care. We want to finance the company in a way that we can just develop this over years, right? To really push this into the market. We have different pockets for others. So you see there's a user trust there. So we have tokens for users. Um, we have tokens reserved for strategic partners that want to join, because we really want to give them an incentive, even though we have realized there's one argument that actually gets them hooked. And it's telling data providers that they can, just like you mind. I mean, it's a bit hand wavy here. But that you can mine tokens with data, just like the you had the early Bitcoin mining, that really gets them thinking.
It does.
If
And we've
I'm the
seen it
first
also,
person,
we saw that with Wi-Fi as well, with that early mining incentive. It got everyone going, especially because some of them really were aware of what was going on before it launched. So they were excited when the fair launch happened.
yeah,
And that's where the question of fair launch comes in. But regardless, it got a lot of FOMO because look what happened to that price. The incentive was the reason. So
yeah.
having those incentivizations is not a bad move for an entrepreneur like you.
I think so too. Eventually, it needs to decentralize, though, right? And this is why it's also unlocking, because at one point, and this is the interesting thing, actually, something that I've been studying in university, is the governance of open source. And I'm not talking about protocols, but just open source. Like if you're taking a look at Linux and Linus Torvald,
Mm-hmm.
who actually left the company after 7 years. Those things need to happen to true open source protocols. The founders need to lose control.
And is that the plan? Because even now, what a great point you make. Because in the DeFi narrative, we don't really see authentic DeFi for the most part because you can't yet. There's still multi-sigs, there's still that interim sort of quasi-control or semi-control by just default. It has to happen for it to eventually switch into a DeFi gear later. So many people, I think, misappropriate or misunderstand, or depending on what camp they're in or whether they're a user. But the goal, I would imagine, for you is to switch off the team tap eventually so that you can be authentically decentralized at some point.
Something that we're looking into right now is that we're not having this typical foundation model, but that we decentralize also the distribution of the tokens to different already existing nonprofits, to really make sure that there is not just kind of like the founders suddenly being on the board of the foundation, which, like, don't get me wrong, is also great, and that is cool, but we need to make sure that people that are making the decisions are starting to diverge as well.
That's
What
awesome.
I've learned in the research back in the days, and taking a look at open source development, is that in the first couple of years, you will need the strong founder to push the whole project further. And this is a very individual and personal role. And this is something that I have been doing over the last 3 years, and I will keep doing. Um, and it's a question of maturity of the organization when it's ready to really step up to fully decentralize.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the reason why we're not seeing this happening in blockchain already, I mean, take a look at Linux. Now they get like 1 billion in funding to really enhance the server software, and it's coming from all multiple kinds of sources, and this is amazing. But the thing is, it's so young. The
Mm.
whole blockchain space is so young. We've just seen the first things actually coming into play and really getting traction.
Mm.
I think it's going to take another 1 year, 2 years to see like a real decentralized version, because Uniswap wouldn't fly with the company behind it right now.
Exactly. And we also know there's a lot of top-down pressure for some of the DEXs right now, depending on what region, certainly the US. A lot of SEC and CFTC inquiry for different parties as well. But let's go back to that token for a moment. Now, one of the things you mentioned is that your objective was to have a small raise. We see that. But the distribution, again, one of the things that I am a staunch advocate of is the transparency and the locks. One of the things I've noticed is the price of the differentiation depending on different parties. Now, as someone who is an advocate for being egalitarian, for making sure there's a sort of a one-stop price, that didn't happen with you. You had a price between 0.025 to 0.05. So not a lot of fluctuation, but it was differentiated. Do you think you got the mix right? And I also wanted to ask, Julian, why do the 6-month start? This was tough for me to understand. That seems very quick. Even though we want to see price discovery and real utility, that's still relatively fast moving for the majority of those who were engaged in supporting you in investing in this utility. Why let them have access to this in 6 months?
Well, the difference in price comes from there's this video of like how you build a movement. Maybe you've seen it with the kid dancing on the hill, and then the next person kind of joining them, and we are kind of like the kid on the hill dancing there all alone. When the first people started joining us, and like when someone like Bruce starts joining you, I think it's only fair that um, you do have a hat tip that you can give at that point, because it's risky, um, and it's the first kind of validation actually. But it comes with a downside, which is that we have the 6-month lockup and the 12-month vesting. And so in this bull market, this is really long, right? We're talking about 18 months when like all the tokens are available. Who knows what's going to happen in 18 months? This is like eternity in crypto.
And it does seem that your advisors are there poised for the long term, to be honest, because a lot of them are there building their own infrastructure, their own technologies, their own tokens as well.
So, truth be told, all of them would have preferred the community sale because there's no lockup and it's 10 cents only. And the only problem is that it's capped so that multiple people can participate.
Right. Well, that will be the FOMO event. Let's be real. That's going to happen. And we'll talk about why in a moment, because it is very small cap, that one. Very, very small. But again, the differentiation between, I guess, the 0.025, the 0.05, and then the 0.10, it's not a huge difference. I'm not too stressed about that because we see now there's a lot of encouragement for more transparency of having similar prices anyway. Not too much of a variation in pre-sales and the public sale, and then more beyond that when it's the live secondary market. So the thing I did want to ask you is about the advisors, about the ambassadors. Now, 2% for each allocated in your total supply. What's the transparency of this in terms of who they are, especially the ambassadors? Because I could see easily the advisors on the information that's available to us all. But I wanted to understand the ambassadors because sometimes in crypto, some of the people who are the ambassadors are actually influencers. Some of them sometimes in some companies are actually US influencers, which again is a concern for me because I sometimes worry, are they going to put themselves in a difficult situation when it comes to regulation and compliance? So can you tell us a bit more about this, who the advisors are, what this means, what do they do?
I think something that we're not so vocal about, but that is actually true, is no one got tokens for free. So even the founders had to pay for them, and the ambassadors also had to pay for them. But the only upside is to get an allocation, because the price doesn't really matter if the allocation is like super small, right? And so with the allocation that we're looking at, you are not seeing a huge inflation in the next, like right after launch. And this is what you want to be concerned about. So actually the impact of the inflation in the next couple of months is rather tiny. So, and this is where like it could have been 0.001 cent. It wouldn't really move the needle if there's just so much available. So the thing that actually that we played with is just the availability of being able to get in at that point. And there must be a really good reason for it, because you're helping the protocol, and this is what it's for, right? You're pre-financing this open source thing.
Julian, I wish I had a talk to you when you did the ambassador program. So let's imagine I did. So people can understand. Let's say I was one of those who were pitching to be an ambassador. I'd love to know from you, because no one in the world can do this better than you, what it was like to go through the process with your team of deciding who these ambassadors were. And I ask you this because Bruce is someone I immensely respect, and he knows that. And he's also, very much involved in organizations like, I'm going to say, the venture DAO system, very much a proponent of DAOs. So he wants to advocate for more innovation right across the spectrum of blockchain. In that context, he's also very much exposed to potential ambassadors as well. And he's a colleague of yours, and clearly someone who understands the long-term game. So these ambassadors to me would be someone who is long-term, someone who really wants to support you and support ecosystems like Polkadot and like the movement in Ethereum as they progress for the long term as well. So how do you make sure that you don't get those quick shills? How do you make sure you don't get those people that just dump you and move on?
I believe that, like, first of all the different pockets that we have for the community is something that we are not easily going to distribute. So the community tokens that you're seeing there are, for the most majority, not touched yet, and we haven't even started to think about how we want to distribute them, because there's so much happening right now. So in terms of like making a buzz, I think that what you want to do is you want to create, like, you have a couple of projects that have basically nothing and that are being shilled to people, and I think that what we want to do is we want to have the ability to get in front of people. And so I think you do have to look at the short term and the midterm and the long term at the same time, because you might not like that you need to advertise, let's say, in a certain newspaper, to give a different example. But if a certain type of audience is just reading newspapers like that, like a boulevard newspaper, then this is where you need to go. And so being an entrepreneur, I am very, for me, it's important to actually reach those people, and there are different messages. And it's a complicated way of saying, yes, we want to get in front of people, and there will be people that are, just chilling the project because they got into the community cell. And the thing is, I think it's okay, right?
As long as the product and the team and the protocol is good. So I love this conversation. You're just getting so real. So that's why you have the clapper and dancers, those who apply the formula, those who we see the influencers who come, really with the formula in mind to get more reach that's monetizable for them. And in your instance, you're an entrepreneur, you understand. But the question will be about reputation. Sometimes the reputation of some of these entities and parties is really built on the formula and built on the clap and dance, not on the educational value itself. So I'm sure you'd be looking at that. But what about the transparency of the parties you engage with? That's what I want to know. Are you making sure that people can also see that marketing strategy as transparent as a blockchain? Are the ambassadors known by the people? Because I think we're tired of just the shill approach, when some of these people are also engaged in some other startups that aren't like you. That's the problem we have, is the inconsistency of some of these actors.
I think what's really important is to keep a consistent message. So not to necessarily like change your message towards like a reward-driven thing. So whoever we engage with, it is important to us to focus on that we want to bridge data privacy and data verifiability, that we want to replace the cookie because we think the free web is in danger. And you will get sick and tired of me saying that at one point, but I'm not going to change, my statement towards like, hey, buy this now because it's going to go up. This is not what it's what we
and
are
that's
about.
Why I pushed you about the advisor, the ambassadors, because I just don't understand exactly who they are. So maybe in time we'll understand more of that. But I can tell you this on camera. I wish I had have contacted you when you had that program, because obviously I support the kind of discussion we're having right now. And certainly the token, if it's longitudinal for real tech, real protocols, real value, who wouldn't want to support that who's transparent and willing to say that they took part in those pre-sales for the reason of the longevity of this and the viability. So, it was my fault for not doing that in researching you then. Now, the GitHub itself and the open source nature, I wanted to ask you about that, because you pride yourself on being an open source protocol. If anyone who's a dev wants to go and explore this, is it going to be something where you see robust repositories right now? Is it going to be something that you see a lot of developers engaged in? Is there a Discord, for example? Is there a lot of technical discussions happening that people can really engage with, considering that there's apps to be built? There's more potential for people to have their own independent input into this as they experiment with content creation as well.
No, we are not ready for that phase yet. Right now, we have gone through a workshop with Parity. They helped us set this up. We've actually reached out to many of the Polkadot known founders to talk to them, to see, to advise us on the tech side. But what we're doing right now is we're staying small and really developing. And once we are at a stage that we can open up, then we will present and also ask for public feedback. There are some public things out there where we have where we kind of showed our technical chops. So a contribution that we have proposed to the Polkadot ecosystem that was actually rewarded, that we're going to build now as well, kind of on the side.
Is that like with a grant or something like that?
Yeah. Yeah. We can't publicly talk about it yet because we need to provision the first milestone, which is completely fair. So this is why you will not see me waiving this, also there, let's provide something first. I really like your approach of pushing teams to invite others. But I think we need to have something, because the ideation and exploration phase, this is over now. We have come to a framework of what we want to implement. Now we need to start implementing that, to have at least a framework that we can go live with, and then we can invite people to give feedback.
Yes, and we'll talk about that when you're ready. Let's do that, and also have that the related parties on. But for now, because you're not predominantly open source yet, you're still moving in that direction to really unlock and unleash and disclose. Do you think that's an issue, though, in the spirit of open source, when you're about to launch this token, you're about to really engage with the broader community in crypto to start off? Do you think it's the right approach to not allow, and not enable us to really look into the GitHub? Because that's part of the trust. That's part of the process for us to be able to know that there's a lot under the hood.
It would certainly, if we would say, look, the protocol is nearly ready. But that's not, that's unfortunately not what we're saying. We will, our plan is to launch the mainnet late summer, early Q3. So we are just about to get started. You can see the technical description in form of the white paper already. And everything else, we need to start working on it to actually put something live. So our approach, we came from a software side, and we are now building the correlating parts on chain. And other companies were coming from a different side, where they first built on chain and then had to build all the SDKs, etc., etc. So there will be a couple of weeks or months that we will need to really start building that before we can actually engage with the audience. And that you need to be transparent about. So how much do you have? The answer is we have a pretty solid roadmap, and also technical understanding of how we're building it. We also have some strong signals from externals that obviously trust us. I mean, if you're looking at the technical advisors, there are actually some that can evaluate that and have done so. Also from, and this is important to me, also from the edtech space. But now we need to build it, and this is what and this is the beauty of being able to sell the token, is because it allows us to fund open source developments and technology. If we wouldn't need the money because we had it, we wouldn't be raising this.
Well, let's go to the next step. So perfect segue. So you've written a lot about the ICO. I've read some of the things you wrote in 2018, and we've seen ICO, we've seen IEO, we've seen IDO, we've seen now those significant number of platforms that are emerging, and there's going to be a lot more in the marketplace. People don't know that that's coming. Now, Polkastarter is the word. That's what I want to talk about. Now, we've seen 10x, we've seen 20x, we've seen 30, we've seen 50, we've seen 100 and 200. It worries me, I'm going to say this directly to you, that we see this kind of rapid fire 200 exits. I don't want to see that with you, to be honest, and people are not going to like that. But the reason I ask is because you didn't go and do like a 400,000 raise or a $300,000 raise. You did a 2.2 in that sense. So I want to get real about Polkastarter for a moment. Now, why Polkastarter? Why choose that one specifically? I want to understand that better, especially given that we've seen those numbers, as I said, quite really, in quite a real sense of 20, 30, 40, 50, 100x. What are your thoughts on this? Because you come across as someone who doesn't really want that kind of momentum of the 200 flash, flash in the pan kind of approach.
To be honest, it's the same answer as for the token distribution table. It's not something that we engage with much. So we are very focused on our technology. We wanted to have a platform to really engage our users. That is the primary focus of doing the race, because otherwise, we have built this technology before. We Fractal itself had a Launchpad technology very back in the days, but the reason why we wanted to go with an external Launchpad is because we wanted to get this across to people so they look at it, because we think that's actually decent. And the only reason why we are raising this, the round was completely oversubscribed. Like, we could have just collected 2-3 times that. So to go through all this hassle just for collecting 400,000 that we are later then going to put into the liquidity supply anyway, is solely for the purpose of getting people the chance to get to know us. And
okay, so you collected 400,000 for the Polkastarter Launchpad. This is that small initial public launch. That's the fair way to describe it, I suppose. Now, again,
that's still going to happen. This is going to happen on the 25th of February. So okay, still coming up.
Got it. So 25th of Feb. I'm not trying to plug this, by the way. I want to get into the grill of this. So a two-man team is Polkastarter. Okay, this is what I want to ask you. Now you know that there's a huge continuum of different kinds of launch pads, different types of quality. You can shop around. So why Polkastarter? Again, I'm asking this sincerely because the performance has been outstanding. If you think of it from a monetary standpoint, huge money when we see the performance of Polkastarter. Then we look at things like CoinList and everything between. So how do you shop around, and why did you decide on this one specifically?
We wanted to have a Launchpad to be able to engage with users. And so we didn't look at like what's the performance of others that are launching there, because the race itself and how quick it's going to be, or how, even for the sake of it, how much money we are going to raise there, doesn't matter to us. What matters is that we have the ability to get our points across, and the one that has the most action is the best suited to actually get us across across to the users. And this is kind of the same point that I did with newspapers that you might not like or might like. So I think the whole thing needs to fit the users and the purchasers. Well, and right now they are having a pretty strong thing to say about that. And so the buzz is
it's the buzz, that's for sure. It's really hot right now, let's be real. So the Polkastarter Launchpad, the two-man team that's growing. But the thing is, I invested in a company recently called Finex Flow. Again, not to plug that, I just did, everyone knows. And it also launched in a similar manner. But what they did say was that there were some strong demands in the interview. They explained this from the Polkastarter team. So what's your experience been? This is a tough one, I know, but you are the CEO. No one is going to experience this more. What's it been like working with Polkastarter? Because there are reputations, rumors, and all sorts of things happen right across crypto. I want to clarify that. And it also happens in launchpads as well. So hearing from you on camera is the most powerful response we can get for what it's really like, what actually goes on in the deliberations when you're going through the launchpad process.
The, the thing is that I really don't want to get into the middle of like some launchpad rumor thing or something.
That's why I'm asking
because,
you.
Right. So for us, it was just this straightforward process. What do we need to do? We need a launchpad. How can we structure it? Let's set this up. This was it. We didn't
Well, I
have
appreciate
much.
that. And I appreciate that. So, you clarified this in, I guess, the most simplistic way you can. And I think you would agree that because of the past performance and the way that Polkastarter has performed and the current state of the market, you're going to have no problem with the success of this in the launch. You're just not going to. Because as we talked about before, everything's aligned and underpinning that. That's just a vehicle. Just like an ICO, people misunderstand it's a method, but everything's about you. But I just want to check, I hope you can understand, my job is to make sure that we need to understand the quality of these launchpads. I think there's going to be more discussions about in the future right across the spectrum that does emerge, because everyone wants a piece of the launchpad pie, as you'd appreciate, not just Polkastarter, and there's a lot of competition coming.
There was always this notion, even back in 2017, about like having the platforms, the launchpads being responsible for the quality. And I really have to say, it's like the ERC20 token. It's like exactly. A really nice piece of like infrastructure that's there, and people need to make up their own mind based on what they are seeing and based on the research that they do. And this is why channels like this one are really so important, because this is where you can get the in-depth information.
It's the gold. If only they'd realize most people don't watch the long interviews, but you're right. And so really it's these two parties. It's the user, the speculator or user, but more importantly, those who are the long-term, who are exploring the possibilities of crypto and blockchain and innovation and technology. But then there's also you guys, the CEOs, because you also choose which launchpad you're going to launch on too. Let's be real. So coupling those things together, doing due diligence, understanding that yes, the vehicles are there, the launchpads are vehicles, and that fundamentally the quality of the team, the tech matter, but still it's going to be valid in the future which launchpads really facilitate best for the use case and the technology and team that are working with them. So it's going to be interesting to see how things play out. But right now, it's absolutely exciting to see these launchpads provide these key vehicles. And who better to do it than those who are creating huge attention right now? I think that's quite strategic of you. I think it's also entrepreneurial of you. And I can read between the lines in the sense that the attention is value. The attention is also about giving Fractal a name. And I'm obviously supporting this because I don't own any, but I want you to be known out there. I want this to spread. So speaking of that, to conclude the interview, how can people know more about this as well, Julian? How can they engage in a really, really deep and meaningful way through interaction with social media or beyond?
I think the very best way that we want people to engage with us, and this is something that's going to come up shortly, is that they can use the first tools that are available to really get the utility of what we are doing. And so just, by actually usage. There is something very exciting that's going to come up in the next couple of weeks that we still need to build and facilitate, where people are going to be able to do so. There are going to be other paths as well. So there's going to be a live stream conference actually next Tuesday, the 23rd, coming up, where we will be talking a lot about the protocol, where we will be taking questions from the audience. And this is something that we will continue to do, where we are available to also talk about it, but where we will keep on releasing material as we go. Because something that I think is quite neat is that you kind of package all the information that you have in a software update style, right? Like you push news every 2 weeks, and you tell people what's new, what have we worked on. And this is actually something I'm very much looking forward to, because right now the supporter group is somewhat small, but it's going to grow. And we need to find, like, we need to listen to people. How much news do they actually want? Are they actually reading it? And what do they need from us to really, because, and this is the thing, now they are part of the ecosystem. So we need to facilitate to kind of close the gap between, somewhere between like complete external and employee, to make them, get them somewhere here to help us actually fulfill the mission that we have.
Fantastic. Well, obviously, it's been a long interview. For those who've made it right through, congratulations. You've definitely informed yourself a great deal about Fractal. And again, this is not about FOMO. This is about literally understanding the beginnings of a team that has spent years to get to this point, and definitely plan on several years ahead. You know, again, I'll be transparent. I will be buying Fractal when I can. I'm just going to. And the reason is because I want to support the long term of entities, teams that are building for the real future of this, and not trying to play games with us. That's how I feel. That's my view, and I have that right to say it. I don't encourage people to treat mine as financial advice, but what I do say is look into the teams yourself, do your due diligence, look into the socials, and most importantly, interact. Go to the social networks, and they're available for you. That's the beauty of these kind of models with Telegrams, for example, with Discords. So I'll put them all in the links below, and hopefully, Julian, we can catch up again in the future for less lengthy discussions, but more of those updates that are coming, because this is just the start for you. Polkadot is the buzzword. Technology is there. Then you've got Polkastarter. So February the 25th, very, very soon. Big fireworks are coming for you then. We just know this. And then after that, it's going to test you, because that's when the FOMO has to reside, and the real test is the technology and the team that drive this forward for years ahead. So keep going, mate. Do not stop. And I definitely would be honored to be able to speak with you in the future about what you're doing at Fractal.
Thanks so much for having me on.